I stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom watching my mother count $100 bills on my sister's bed. My hospital discharge papers were still warm in my hand, the ink barely dry on the $47,000 I owed for emergency surgery that had saved my life 3 days ago. Mom, I said, my voice barely a whisper. My abdomen still screamed with every breath. Did you talk to the hospital about the payment plan? She didn't look up. Her fingers, adorned with the diamond rings Dad bought her last Christmas, continued their mechanical counting. Not now, Claire. Your sister's college deposit is due tomorrow. In my first life, this moment had destroyed me. I had begged, cried, and eventually collapsed from infection when I couldn't afford the follow-up care. I died 6 months later, alone in a county hospital, while my family celebrated Madison's acceptance to Yale. But fate, or perhaps something darker and more knowing, had given me a second chance. I woke up on my 18th birthday, 5 years before that terrible surgery, with every painful memory intact. I knew exactly what was coming. I knew that my appendix would rupture during my college entrance exams. I knew that my parents would choose Madison's Ivy League dreams over my survival. I knew that I would die, discarded and forgotten. This time, I would be ready. This time, they would be the ones destroyed. Let me take you back to where it really began, not the surgery, not even my rebirth, but to the roots of the poison tree that was my family. I was born Claire Elizabeth Morrison on a gray October morning, the first child of Richard and Diane Morrison. For exactly 3 years, I was enough. I have hazy memories of those early days. My father's laugh, my mother's soft hands braiding my hair, the feeling of being loved. Then Madison arrived and everything changed. Madison was golden from birth, literally. She had honeyed blonde hair that caught the light, wide blue eyes, and a rosebud mouth that seemed designed to smile for cameras. I had my father's dark brown hair, my grandmother's sharp features, and a serious expression that made relatives uncomfortable. Madison was a doll. I was difficult. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became my mother's favorite refrain before I'd even started kindergarten. At first, the favoritism was subtle. Madison got the nicer toys, the prettier dresses. Her artwork went on the refrigerator while mine went in the trash. She got dance lessons. I got handed library cards and told to find something quiet to do. But I was a child, and I loved my family, so I tried harder. I brought home perfect report cards. I taught myself to play piano from YouTube videos. I won the regional spelling bee in 5th grade. None of it mattered. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say absently before turning to Madison. "Now, sweetie, tell me about your recital." My father was worse because his neglect came wrapped in intellectual contempt. He was a bossé, successful corporate lawyer, proud of his sharp mind and sharper tongue. He valued beauty and charm, qualities Madison had and I didn't. When I tried to discuss my interests with him, he'd cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Claire, nobody wants to hear about your books. Why don't you learn to be more sociable?" Men don't like women who are too smart. I was 12 years old. The financial disparity started in middle school. Madison wanted to attend a prestigious private academy for the arts. The tuition was $35,000 a year. My parents didn't blink. They simply paid it, even taking out a loan to cover the costs. When I asked if I could attend the advanced STEM program at the public magnet school, which was free but required a laptop and some lab fees totaling maybe $800, my mother actually laughed. "Claire, don't be ridiculous. We can't afford extras for both of you. Madison's education is an investment in her future. She's going to be something special. You're smart enough to figure things out on your own." So I did. I got a part-time job at 15, lying about my age to work at a local coffee shop. I saved every penny for a used laptop and bought my own school supplies. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I learned to be invisible at home, to take up as little space as possible, to need nothing. High school was a masterclass in familial cruelty. Madison thrived at her academy, becoming a star in their musical theater program. She was pretty, talented, and socially gifted. College scouts came to her shows. My parents threw elaborate parties to celebrate her achievements, inviting everyone they knew. They beamed with pride, their golden child fulfilling every dream. I, meanwhile, was valedictorian of my public high school, earned a perfect SAT score, and received early acceptance to MIT with a partial scholarship. My mother's response? That's nice. Can you pick up Madison from rehearsal? We're busy planning her graduation party. They spent $15,000 on Madison's high school graduation party. I didn't have a party at all. My mother said it would be redundant and wasteful to have two celebrations in the same year. The money was always the clearest indicator of their feelings. My father was a partner at his firm, pulling in over $300,000 a year. My mother didn't work, preferring to manage Madison's burgeoning social media presence and career opportunities. They weren't struggling. They chose to give everything to one daughter and nothing to the other. Madison's bedroom was redecorated 3 times during high school. Mine still had the same faded pink wallpaper from when I was 6. Madison got a new BMW for her 16th birthday. I got nothing, not even a card. When I turned 16, I was working a double shift at the coffee shop. I came home to find my parents and Madison celebrating her latest callback for a national commercial. They'd forgotten my birthday entirely. The casual cruelty was almost worse than the obvious neglect. My mother would discuss Madison's college plans at the dinner table every night, debating the merits of Yale versus Princeton versus Stanford. She never once asked where I planned to go, even though my acceptance letters were proudly displayed in my room, a room she never entered. My father would brag about Madison to his colleagues, showing pictures and videos. I knew this because I'd heard him on phone calls, his voice warm with pride. He never mentioned having another daughter. At his firm's Christmas party my senior year, one of his partners asked if he had other children. My father actually hesitated before saying, "Just Madison. Well, Claire too, but she's very independent. Doesn't need much from us." I was standing right there. The breaking point in my first life came during the college acceptance season. Madison was accepted to Yale's musical theater program. Prestigious but expensive, even with some scholarship money. She'd need about $45,000 a year in family contribution. I had my MIT acceptance with a scholarship that covered tuition, but I'd need about $20,000 a year for room, board, and expenses. My parents sat us both down for a family meeting in March of my senior year. "Girls," my father began, his voice taking on that practiced lawyer tone that meant he'd already made his decision and was simply delivering the verdict. "We need to discuss finances. We can't afford to fully fund both of your educations." My stomach dropped, but I rallied. "That's okay. I can take out loans for MIT, and I'll keep working." "Claire," my mother interrupted, her voice sharp, "let your father finish." "We've decided," Dad continued, not looking at me, "that we'll fully fund Madison's Yale education. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and she deserves our full support. Claire, you're very capable, and MIT gives good financial aid. You'll figure something out." The room spun. "But I'd still need help with living expenses. I can't work full-time and maintain the grades for my scholarship. I just need—" "You'll manage," my mother said coldly. "Bah, you always do. Madison needs us more." Madison, to her credit, looked slightly uncomfortable, but she didn't object. She never objected. She simply accepted the family's worship as her natural due. In that first life, I went to MIT. I worked 3 jobs. I barely slept. My grades suffered, and I lost my scholarship after freshman year. I had to drop out and come home, defeated and $30,000 in debt. My parents wouldn't let me stay with them. Madison was home from Yale for the summer, and they didn't want the stress of my presence affecting her mental health. I couch surfed, I worked retail, I tried to save money for community college. And then my appendix ruptured. I managed to get myself to the ER. The surgery saved my life, but the bill was catastrophic. I called my parents from my hospital bed, barely able to speak through the pain medication. "Please," I begged my mother. "I need help. I need follow-up care. I can't afford—" "Claire, you're 23 years old. You need to handle your own responsibilities. We're focused on Madison right now. She's graduating Yale this year, and we're planning a celebration. We can't deal with your drama." "Mom, I could die. The infection—" "Don't be so dramatic. You'll figure something out. You always do." She hung up. I tried to figure it out. I couldn't afford the antibiotics. I couldn't afford the follow-up appointments. The infection spread. 6 months later, I died in a county hospital bed, septic and alone. I was 23 years old. My parents didn't come to the funeral. Madison posted a black square on Instagram with the caption, "R.I.P. Claire." and went back to posting about her off-Broadway debut 3 days later. That should have been the end. But I woke up on my 18th birthday, gasping, in my childhood bedroom with the faded pink wallpaper. The vertigo of rebirth was indescribable. I spent the first 3 days locked in my room compiling everything I remembered: dates, events, stock market movements, Bitcoin prices, my parents' financial decisions, Madison's career trajectory, every single betrayal documented in a password-protected file on my laptop. I had 5 years before the appendicitis, 5 years to prepare, 5 years to ensure that this time, when they chose Madison over me, they would destroy themselves in the process. But I had to be smart. I couldn't change too much too fast, or I'd alert them to something being different. I needed to be the same quiet, studious Claire they expected, right up until I wasn't. The first change I made was small. I'd been planning to quit my coffee shop job to focus on SATs. This time I kept it, but I didn't just serve coffee. I listened. I watched. My father's law firm was 3 blocks away, and many of his colleagues came in for their morning fix. I served them lattes and absorbed their conversations about cases, about firm politics, about my father. What I learned was illuminating. Richard Morrison, respected partner, was not quite as respected as he pretended. He was known for cutting corners, for aggressive billing practices that skirted ethical lines, for taking credit for associates' work. He'd made enemies. He'd made mistakes. But he'd been protected by the firm's managing partner, his old law school buddy. That managing partner was retiring in 3 years. I made a note. The second change was my approach to my parents. In my first life, I'd kept trying to earn their love through achievement. This time, I understood the truth. They would never love me. Madison was their chosen one, and I was simply the practice child they'd made before perfecting their technique. So I stopped trying. I stopped sharing my achievements. I stopped asking for their attention. I became a ghost in my own home. The interesting thing about becoming invisible is that people stop guarding their words around you. I heard everything. My mother on the phone with her friends laughing about her difficult daughter. My father complaining to Madison about my sullen attitude. Madison herself talking to her friends about how weird I was and how she couldn't wait to go to college and escape me. I smiled and took notes. The third change was the most important. I started investing. I remembered every major market movement from my first life. Bitcoin was at $380 when I turned 18 in 2014. I knew it would hit nearly $20,000 in late 2017. I took every penny from my coffee shop job and bought in. I used my knowledge of tech stocks, of real estate trends, of startup success stories. By the time I graduated high school, I had turned my $3,000 in savings into $45,000, and I was just getting started. I told no one. I used fake IDs to open accounts in my name. I hid every transaction. My family thought I was poor, struggling, barely scraping by. In reality, I was building a war chest. The college application season in my second life played out almost exactly as it had before. Madison got into Yale. I got into MIT. My parents called the family meeting. My father delivered his verdict about funding Madison's dreams. This time, when they told me I'd have to figure it out, I simply nodded. Okay, I said calmly. I understand. My mother blinked, surprised by my lack of fight. That's mature of you, Claire. I learned from the best, I said, keeping my voice neutral. You've always taught me to be independent. My father actually smiled. Exactly, you'll be fine. You're capable. Madison shifted uncomfortably. Claire, I'm sorry. Don't worry about it, Maddie, I said, using the childhood nickname that always made her smile. I want you to have everything you deserve. And I meant it. Because what Madison deserved was coming. I declined MIT's acceptance. The email I sent was polite but firm. Due to family financial constraints, I would not be able to attend. I enrolled instead in the local state university, which was cheap enough that my coffee shop money and my secret investments could easily cover it. I commuted from home, saving money on room and board. My parents were relieved. It's so much more practical, my mother said. I'm glad you're finally being realistic about your prospects. I smiled and said nothing. Madison went to Yale and my parents went with her. I mean that literally. They spent move-in weekend treating it like a vacation, posting hundreds of photos on Facebook. They toured the campus, had dinner at expensive restaurants, and gushed about their daughter's bright future. When I moved into my state school, I drove myself, carried my own boxes up 3 flights of stairs, and returned to an empty house. But I wasn't angry, I was focused. My state university had something MIT didn't: low visibility and high flexibility. I loaded up on business and computer science courses. I continued investing, growing my portfolio aggressively. By the end of my freshman year, I had $200,000. By the end of sophomore year, nearly $800,000. Bitcoin was surging exactly as I'd remembered, and I timed my sales perfectly. I also started building something else: connections. I'd remembered from my first life that a tech startup called Veritas would be founded in 2016 by a state university dropout and would eventually sell to Google for $2.3 billion. The founder, Marcus Chen, had been a TA in one of my classes. In my first life, I'd never spoken to him. This time, I made sure to get to know him. "You have good instincts," Marcus told me after I'd helped him debug some code. "Ever think about startups?" "Sometimes," I said carefully. "What would you do if you could start any company?" He launched into his vision: data verification software for journalists and researchers. It was everything I remembered, and I was there for its inception. When he asked if I wanted to be an early employee, I made a counteroffer. "Let me be an early investor instead. 20,000 for 5%. He laughed. "You have 20,000? I did, and I invested it. That 5% would eventually be worth $115 million. But I didn't tell Marcus that. I just smiled and said I believed in his vision. Meanwhile, at home, the neglect continued. My parents came back from visiting Madison and barely acknowledged my presence. They'd spent $10,000 on her dorm furnishings. My mother showed me pictures of Madison's room decorated in Yale blue and white, with custom curtains and a mini chandelier. "Isn't it beautiful?" she cooed. "We wanted her to feel special." "It's perfect for her," I agreed. My father was worse. He'd attended Yale for undergrad, and Madison's acceptance had fulfilled some vicarious dream. He bought her Yale everything: clothing, accessories, even tailgated at her school's football games, despite never caring about sports. He joined the Yale Parent Association and donated $50,000 to the annual fund, ensuring his name appeared in the donor list. I existed in the background of their Yale-centered lives, attending my state school classes, working at the coffee shop, and quietly building an empire they couldn't see. The summer after my sophomore year, Madison's freshman year at Yale, brought an interesting development. My appendix started bothering me. Not the catastrophic rupture, not yet, just warning signs. Pain in my right side, occasional nausea. I knew what was coming, and I knew exactly when. 3 months. 3 months until my college entrance exams in my first life, which were now in my past. But I'd take the GMAT in 3 months, a test I hadn't bothered with before. The appendicitis would happen then. My body was following the same pattern, just slightly shifted in time. I went to a doctor, paying cash, keeping the visit secret. I could have the appendix removed now, prophylactically. It would be easy, safe, covered by my parents' insurance, but I didn't. Because I needed my parents to make the choice. I needed them to show their true colors when my life was on the line. I needed the moment that would justify everything I was about to do to them. So I waited. I let the time bomb in my abdomen tick down. And I prepared for the day that would change everything. The GMAT was scheduled for August 15th, 3 months away. I studied minimally. I didn't need to. I'd scored in the 98th percentile in my first life before my appendix ruptured in the middle of the test. This time, I knew the exact moment it would happen. 10:47 a.m. during the quantitative section, question 23. Instead of studying, I spent those 3 months arranging my pieces on the board. First, I met with a lawyer. Not my father's firm, obviously, but a small practice specializing in estate planning. I was 20 years old, and I wanted to write a will. "That's unusual," the lawyer, Mr. Harrison, said kindly. "Most people your age don't think about this." "I like to be prepared," I said, and I detailed exactly how my estate, currently worth over $1 million in investments he couldn't trace, should be distributed. Not a penny would go to my parents or Madison. Everything would go to charities supporting young people aging out of foster care. scholarship funds for disadvantaged students, and medical debt relief programs. If something happens to me, I said clearly, I want to make sure my money helps people who actually need it. Mr. Harrison nodded approvingly and filed the paperwork. Second, I documented everything. Every forgotten birthday, every cruel comment, every financial disparity. I had receipts, screenshots, photos. I created a timeline of neglect that read like evidence for a court case. Because, in a way, it was not a legal court, but the court of public opinion. Third, I made a series of phone calls to Madison's Yale Financial Aid Office asking pointed questions about what happens to students if their family's financial circumstances change. To my parents' homeowners insurance, confirming their coverage and asking about liability clauses. To my father's law firm, posing as a potential client and asking about their ethics policies. I was gathering ammunition. August 15th arrived on a brutally hot day. I woke up at 5 a.m. with pain already gnawing at my right side. I knew what was coming. I took the bus to the testing center, checked in, and sat down at my computer terminal. At 10:47 a.m., during question 23 of the quantitative section, my appendix ruptured. The pain was worse than I remembered. White-hot, blinding agony that made me scream and collapse. The testing proctor called 911. I was on the floor, vomiting, barely conscious, but even through the pain, I was aware. This was it. This was the moment. The ambulance came. They rushed me to the hospital. The surgeon on call was the same one from my first life, Dr. Patricia Huang, competent and efficient. She saved my life within 2 hours of my arrival. I woke up in a recovery room, disoriented and in pain, but alive. The nurse was checking my vitals. "You're lucky," she said kindly. "Dr. Huang said your appendix was severely infected. If you'd waited even another hour, you might not have made it." "My parents?" I croaked. "We've been calling. We left several messages. They haven't called back yet." Of course they hadn't. Madison was having a crisis at Yale, a bad breakup with her first college boyfriend. My mother had mentioned it the day before, tossing off the comment while barely looking at me. "We're leaving tomorrow to visit your sister. She needs us." They were in New Haven. I was in a hospital bed. And they weren't coming. The hospital kept me for 3 days. Not once did my parents visit. Not once did they call back. The nurses got quieter around me each day, their pity obvious. On the third day, a patient advocate came to discuss my bill. "Your surgery and hospital stay will be approximately $47,000, she said gently. "You're under your parents' insurance, but there's a $10,000 deductible and the out-of-network emergency room charge means the insurance is only covering $12,000. You're responsible for $35,000. I took a slow breath, pretending to be shocked. "I don't have that kind of money. We have payment plans, and you should discuss this with your parents. Most families work together on unexpected medical costs." "Of course," I said weakly. "Can I have a few days before we set up the payment plan? I need to talk to them." She agreed, kind and understanding. I signed the discharge papers and took an Uber home. Another $40 I carefully documented. My parents returned from Yale that evening. They walked in laden with shopping bags, laughing about some adventure they'd had with Madison. I was lying on the couch, still in pain, my discharge papers on the coffee table. My mother saw me and jumped. "Oh, Claire, you're home. How did your test go?" "My appendix ruptured during the exam," I said quietly. "I had emergency surgery. I've been in the hospital for 3 days." Silence. Then my father frowned. "Why didn't you call us?" "The hospital did, multiple times." My mother had the grace to look embarrassed. "Oh, well, we were dealing with Madison's situation. It was very serious." "So was mine. I almost died." "Don't be dramatic," my father snapped. "You're obviously fine now. These things happen. You're young. You'll recover quickly." I sat up slowly, gasping at the pain. "The surgery cost $47,000. Insurance only covered part of it. I owe $35,000. More silence. My parents exchanged a look. "That's unfortunate," my mother finally said. "But we can't help with that right now. Madison's college expenses are due next month. and we're already stretched thin. I almost died, I repeated, my voice hollow. You're being dramatic again, my father said irritably. Lots of people have medical debt. You'll set up a payment plan. It builds credit. Madison gets $45,000 a year for college, but I can't have help with $35,000 to cover the surgery that saved my life? My mother's expression hardened. Madison's education is an investment in her future. You made your choice going to state school. We all have to live with our choices, Claire. So, my choice is to live with debt from nearly dying, and your choice is to fund Madison's Ivy League experience? Exactly, my father said. Now, if you're done with this tantrum, your mother and I have dinner reservations. We're celebrating. Madison got cast in her first Yale theater production. They left me on the couch in pain with $35,000 in medical debt, while they went to celebrate my sister. I lay there for a long time after they left. Then I picked up my phone and made a call. Mr. Harrison, it's Claire Morrison. I need to update my will and I need to discuss legal emancipation options. The war had begun. The next 6 months were a masterclass in calculated revenge. But I had to be patient. Revenge, I'd learned, is a dish best served cold with impeccable timing and ironclad justification. I set up the payment plan with the hospital, documenting every interaction. I made sure to have witnesses and records of every request for help from my parents and every refusal. I was building a case not for court, but for something more powerful: public opinion and familial destruction. In my first life, I died in 6 months. This time, I thrived. My Bitcoin holdings were soaring. My investment in Veritas was appreciating as Marcus's company gained traction. My other stock picks were performing exactly as I'd remembered. By Christmas 2016, I had $3.2 million in assets. I was a secret millionaire living in my parents' house, paying them $400 a month in rent, while they spent thousands on Madison's every whim. The rent was particularly galling. They'd instituted it 2 months after my surgery, claiming they needed help with expenses. Meanwhile, they'd just bought Madison a $15,000 designer wardrobe for her internship interviews. The hypocrisy would have been funny if it weren't so painful. But I paid the rent, and I documented every payment. Christmas that year was a revelation. My parents spent over $8,000 on Madison's gifts: designer clothes, jewelry, a new MacBook Pro, even a trip to Paris for spring break. I got a $50 Amazon gift card and a book titled Financial Independence for Millennials. The irony was exquisite. I was worth over $3 million. The book sat on my shelf, unread, a monument to their ignorance. Madison came home for the holidays, glowing with Yale confidence. She'd matured from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful, with that polished Ivy League sheen that comes from good nutrition, no stress, and unlimited opportunities. We were both 21 now, but we could have been different species. "How's state school?" she asked me at Christmas dinner, her tone suggesting she was asking about prison. "Educational," I said. "Claire's doing fine," my mother interjected. "She's very independent." "That's good," Madison said, and I could see she genuinely believed it. She thought my lack of support was my choice, my preference. She had no idea that independence wasn't a gift our parents had given me. It was the only option they'd left me. After dinner, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. "Do you think we should help Claire with her medical debt?" my mother asked. "She's been making payments for months." "Absolutely not," my father said firmly. "She needs to learn responsibility. Madison never asks us for anything beyond what we offer. Claire is always needing something. It's exhausting." I stood in the hallway listening. Madison never asked because she never had to. She was given everything before she could ask. I always needed something, because I was given nothing and expected to survive anyway. I went to my room and made another note in my file. The documentation was growing extensive. In January 2017, things started accelerating. Bitcoin hit $1,000. I'd bought in at $380 and continued accumulating. My holdings were now worth over $8 million. Veritas raised a Series A at a $50 million valuation, making my 5% stake worth $2.5 million on paper. Other investments were paying off. I was worth nearly $12 million and I was 21 years old. I started making moves. First, I incorporated a holding company in Delaware, Morrison Capital Ventures. I transferred all my assets into it, creating separation between my personal identity and my wealth. I hired a lawyer and an accountant, both sworn to confidentiality. I was becoming untouchable. Second, I rented a small apartment near campus. I told my parents I wanted independence. They were thrilled. It meant they didn't have to look at me anymore, and they could convert my bedroom into a yoga studio for my mother. I paid $800 a month in rent while sitting on a $12 million portfolio. The cognitive dissonance was almost funny. Third, I started researching my family more deeply. My mother's parents, my maternal grandparents, had died when I was young, but I remembered them vaguely, and more importantly, I remembered that my grandmother had left a trust fund for her grandchildren. In my first life, I'd never seen a penny. Madison had gotten a payout at 21, $50,000 that our parents controlled and spent on her behalf. I'd never asked about it. I'd assumed I wasn't included. This time, I hired a lawyer to investigate. What we found was illuminating. My grandmother's trust had indeed set aside money for all of my grandchildren to be distributed equally at age 21. I'd turned 21 in October 2016. Madison had turned 21 the same year, 3 months after me. We should have each received $50,000. Madison got her check. I never did, because my father, as trustee, had simply forgotten to process my distribution. He'd claimed to the trust, to the Piedztabas, administrator, that I was unreachable and had declined the funds. Forged signatures said I'd waived my right to the inheritance. It was fraud, clear, prosecutable fraud. I had my lawyer send a legal demand letter to my father, not to reclaim the money, I didn't need it, but to establish in legal documentation that my family had stolen from me, that even inheritances weren't safe from their favoritism. My father's response came through his own lawyer, a blustering threat about defamation and family loyalty. But beneath the bluster, I could see panic. He knew he'd been caught. He knew it was documented. He paid me the $50,000 within a week, along with a nasty letter about my ungrateful attitude and threats against family. I donated the entire amount to a medical debt relief charity in my name. Then I sent my father the receipt with a note. Since you thought I should learn to handle my own medical debt, I'm helping others do the same. You're welcome. His furious phone call was the last time we spoke for 6 months. By summer 2017, I was ready for the next phase. Bitcoin was approaching $3,000. My portfolio was worth over $25 million. Veritas was in talks with several major tech companies about acquisition. Marcus had told me confidentially that Google was offering $2.3 billion, exactly as I remembered. But I wasn't focused on my money anymore. I was focused on theirs. My parents' finances were, I'd discovered, far less secure than they pretended. My father made $300,000 a year, but he also spent $350,000 a year. The difference came from loans, credit cards, and strategic financial manipulation. They owned their house but had refinanced it twice to fund Madison's expenses and their lifestyle. They owed $400,000 on a house worth $600,000. Their retirement accounts were anemic. My father had borrowed against his 401k repeatedly. My mother had no income and no savings of her own. They were leveraged to the hilt, living a lie of affluence while drowning in debt. And it was all because of Madison. Not Madison's fault, really. She didn't ask to be worshipped. She didn't demand they spend themselves into oblivion for her, but they had willingly, joyfully. Every voice lesson, every designer outfit, every Yale expense, they'd sacrificed their financial future for her present. Meanwhile, I'd offered to pay rent at market rate when I lived with them. I'd offered to contribute to household expenses. They'd refused, saying they didn't need my money. Their pride was going to destroy them. I started with my father's law firm. Remember the managing partner, his old friend who'd been protecting him? He'd retired in spring 2017, just as I'd known he would. The new managing partner was a woman named Elizabeth Chen, no relation to Marcus, who'd built her reputation on ethics and integrity. I compiled a file. Every corner my father had cut, every ethical violation, every case where he'd taken credit for associates' work. I had dates, times, names. I'd gathered it all over the past 2 years, using my coffee shop job as cover to befriend his colleagues and their assistants, to overhear conversations, to collect evidence. I sent it anonymously to Elizabeth Chen along with a note. Richard Morrison has been skating by on reputation rather than merit for years. Perhaps it's time for a review. The investigation took 3 months. My father had no idea it was coming until he was called into a meeting in September 2017 and presented with the findings. He was given a choice: resign quietly or be terminated and potentially reported to the state bar. He resigned. His income dropped to zero overnight. I watched from the shadows as the news rippled through the family. My mother called me frantic. "Claire, your father lost his job. It's a disaster. We don't know how we'll manage." "That's terrible," I said neutrally. "What happened?" "Some kind of ethics investigation. It's ridiculous. Political nonsense." "I'm sure he'll land on his feet," I said. "He's very capable." "We might need to ask Madison to take a semester off from Yale. We can't afford—" "That would be devastating for her," I interrupted. She's doing so well. You can't disrupt her education." My mother exhaled. "You're right. We'll figure something out. We always do." "Exactly," I said. "You're very resourceful." I hung up and I smiled. 2 weeks later, my mother called again. They were refinancing the house again, pulling out another $50,000 in equity to cover Madison's fall semester at Yale and their expenses while my father looked for work. "We wanted to let you know," my mother said, her tone almost apologetic, "in case you were planning to inherit the house someday. There's not much equity left." "I wasn't planning on inheriting anything," I said honestly. "Good. That's very mature." I wasn't being mature. I was being truthful. Because I already knew they'd have nothing left to leave me. My father struggled to find new employment. The legal community in our city wasn't large, and word had spread about his resignation. Firms were wary. He took contract work, making maybe $80,000 a year, less than a third of his previous income. The financial pressure started showing. They couldn't afford Madison's spring semester at Yale. They couldn't cover their mortgage and her tuition. Something had to give. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I knew from Madison's Instagram, which I followed obsessively, that she was home for winter break when the crisis hit. It was December 2017. I accidentally ran into her at the coffee shop where I used to work and still occasionally visited. "Claire!" She seemed genuinely happy to see me. "I didn't know you still came here." "Sometimes," I said. "How's Yale?" Her face fell. "Actually, not great. Mom and Dad are having money problems. I might need to transfer." "Transfer from Yale?" I made my voice shocked. "But you love it there." "I do," she said miserably, but they can't afford it anymore. Dad lost his job, and they've been trying to make it work, but—" "That's terrible," I said, and I meant it, not because I felt sorry for Madison, but because it was terrible that our parents had put all their eggs in her basket and were now watching the basket collapse. "Mom suggested I take out loans," Madison continued. "But Yale is so expensive. I'd graduate with like $200,000 in debt." "That's a lot," I agreed. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw a flicker of something I'd never seen before: consideration. "You went to state school to save money. Was it worth it?" "I learned a lot," I said carefully. "But I never had the choice you have. Mom and Dad made it clear they were funding your education, not mine." Madison's eyes widened. "What? That's not—" "I thought you wanted to be independent." "Is that what they told you?" She looked stricken. "Claire, I didn't know. I thought—" "It's fine," I said, cutting her off. "I didn't want her pity." "You got what they were willing to give. I adapted. It worked out." "But your medical debt," she said slowly. "After your surgery. Mom said you were handling it yourself because you wanted to build credit." I laughed bitterly. "Madison, I almost died, and they were with you at Yale. They chose not to help with a $35,000 medical bill because they needed to save money for your tuition. Did they tell you that part?" Her face went pale. "No. They said you were fine. That it was minor. Minor, I repeated. My appendix ruptured. I was septic. If I'd waited another hour, I would have died. Claire, and don't, I said, standing up. This isn't your fault, but it is the truth. Our parents chose you over me every single time. When it counted most, when I needed them to choose my life over your comfort, they picked your comfort. So enjoy Yale if you can manage to stay. Just know what it cost. I left her sitting there and I didn't look back. The phone call came 3 days later. My father, his voice tight with suppressed rage. Claire, we need to talk. About what? We need your help. With Madison's tuition. I let the silence stretch. My help? You've been working for years. You must have some savings. We need to borrow $45,000 for her spring semester. We'll pay you back. With what money? I asked. You're unemployed. Mom doesn't work. You've refinanced the house to the limit. I'll find something, he said tersely. But we can't let Madison lose Yale. It's too important. To whom? To all of us. To her future. Claire, don't be difficult. We're family. Family, I repeated. When I needed $35,000 for medical bills, you told me to handle it myself. You said it would build character. You said you couldn't afford to help me in Madison. That was different. How? You were fine. You recovered. Madison's education is... My life, I interrupted, was less important than Madison's college. Choice, you made that very clear. So, no, I won't lend you money for her tuition. You selfish little... He caught himself, breathing hard. Claire, please. If Madison loses Yale, her career is over before it starts. She needs this. I needed my parents when I was dying in a hospital. We don't always get what we need. I hung up. My mother called next, crying. Then Madison herself, apologizing and begging. I listened to each call, unmoved. They'd made their choices. Now they could live with the consequences. In January 2018, Madison withdrew from Yale. She enrolled in the state university, the same one I'd attended. My parents were devastated. They stopped posting on Facebook. They stopped attending social events. Their golden child's fall from Ivy League grace was too humiliating to share. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Bitcoin hit $19,000 in December 2017. I sold at $18,500, liquidating $35 million in holdings. Veritas sold to Google in February 2018 for $2.3 billion. My 5% stake netted me $115 million after taxes. At 22 years old, I was worth $150 million. I hired a team, lawyers, accountants, investment advisors, a PR firm. I established a foundation, the Claire Morrison Foundation for Survivors, dedicated to helping young people who'd been abandoned by their families. Medical debt relief, scholarship funds, emergency housing. I was going to do everything my family never did for me, for people who needed it. And then I went public. I gave an interview to a popular online publication known for human interest stories. I told them everything. The neglect, the favoritism, the stolen inheritance, the choice they made to fund Madison's college over my medical care. I had receipts for everything. Bank statements, medical bills, emails, texts, recorded phone calls, legal in our single-party consent state. The article was titled, "The Daughter They Forgot: How One Woman Survived Family Abandonment and Built a Fortune." It went viral. Within 24 hours, it had 5 million views. Within 48, I was trending on Twitter. Within 72 hours, my parents' names and faces were all over the internet, attached to words like narcissistic, abusive, and criminal. The response was nuclear. My father's attempts to find legal work evaporated. No firm would touch him after the article. My mother, who'd built a small business as a life coach for parents, lost every client. Madison's Instagram, once thriving with 100,000 followers, was flooded with comments calling her complicit and spoiled. She deleted her accounts. They tried to do damage control. My father released a statement claiming I was lying, that they'd always supported both daughters equally. I released the bank statements showing Madison's Yale payments next to the collection notices for my medical debt. He had no response. My mother tried the sympathy route, claiming she'd done her best and didn't realize I felt neglected. Released the recordings of her saying I was too difficult and not worth the investment. Madison stayed silent, which was the smartest thing she could have done. But the internet found her anyway, digging up every privilege she'd enjoyed while I struggled. Her Yale photos, her designer clothes, her spring break in Paris. Next to them, screenshots of my GoFundMe from my first life, begging for help with medical bills. The court of public opinion delivered its verdict, guilty. But I wasn't finished. In March 2018, I made an offer. I would pay off Madison's state school education. Tuition, room, board, everything. She'd graduate debt-free. The condition, my parents had to publicly admit, in detail, every way they'd failed me. Every forgotten birthday, every stolen opportunity, every cruel comment. They had to list it all, own it all, apologize for it all, and it had to be video recorded and posted to YouTube. My father refused immediately. I won't humiliate myself for your entertainment. Then Madison pays her own way, I said simply. It took 3 weeks of Madison crying, of their bills piling up, of their social circle completely abandoning them before he agreed. The video was 12 minutes long. My father, gray and exhausted, read from a script my lawyers had prepared. Every sin cataloged and confessed. My mother sat beside him, weeping. Madison wasn't in frame, but I could hear her crying too. The video got 15 million views. I paid for Madison's education as promised, but I never spoke to my parents again. The epilogue is almost anticlimactic. By summer 2018, my parents' marriage was collapsing under the weight of their public shaming and financial ruin. They lost the house in foreclosure. All that refinancing finally caught up with them. They divorced by fall, each blaming the other for the disaster of their lives. My father moved to another state, taking whatever legal work he could find. He works document review now, making $40,000 a year, living in a studio apartment. He's 62, with no retirement savings and no prospects. My mother lives with her sister in Arizona, working part-time at a gift shop. Her dreams of being a life coach died with her reputation. She's bitter, angry, and tells anyone who will listen that I'm an ungrateful daughter who destroyed the family. Neither of them seems to grasp that they destroyed themselves the moment they decided one daughter was worth everything and the other was worth nothing. Madison is complicated. She graduated from state school with a degree in communications. She's not bitter toward me, which surprises me. We've had coffee a few times, awkward meetings where she apologizes and I accept without forgetting. I didn't know, she says. I really didn't understand what they were doing to you. You didn't want to know, I correct, but you benefited, so you didn't ask questions. She nods, tears in her eyes. I can't change the past. No, I agree. You can't. She works in marketing now, making $65,000 a year. She lives modestly, aware that the world knows her as the spoiled sister from that viral article. She'll never be famous, never be special. She's just another person, which is what she always was beneath our parents' worship. I don't hate her. I don't love her either. She's a reminder of what could have been if our parents had loved us both. As for me, I'm 23 now in this second life. I'm worth $400 million after my foundation donations and continued investing. I graduated from state school with highest honors. I'm getting my MBA from Wharton, yes, an Ivy, but I'm paying for it myself. I have a penthouse in Philadelphia, a team of people who work for my foundation, and a life full of purpose. I date someone now, a kind, brilliant woman named Sarah who's a pediatric surgeon. She knows my story. She understands. Do you regret it? She asked me once. The revenge? I thought about it. No, they needed to face consequences. They needed to understand that actions have costs. And you needed them to hurt like they hurt you. Yes, I admitted. I needed that too. She kissed my forehead. I'm glad you survived. So am I. I still see my family sometimes from a distance. My father, aged and broken, at a legal conference where he was serving coffee to the attorneys he used to work with. My mother, hollow-eyed in her gift shop, selling touristy trinkets to people who don't know her shame. Madison, careful and quiet, building a life from the rubble of the one she lost. They made their choices. They chose Madison's Yale dreams over my hospital bills. They chose one daughter's comfort over the other daughter's life. They chose appearance over reality, favoritism over fairness, ego over love. And they lost everything. I didn't just survive their abandonment, I transcended it. I built an empire from the ashes of their neglect, and I used it to help others escape the same fate. Every young person my foundation helps, every medical bill we pay, every scholarship we fund. It's a middle finger to parents like mine who believe some children matter more than others. My phone rings. It's Marcus Chen calling about another startup opportunity. I'm a venture capitalist now, investing in companies founded by people who were underestimated, overlooked, abandoned. People like me. Claire, Marcus says, his voice excited. I've got someone you need to meet. She's brilliant, building something revolutionary, but her family cut her off when she chose tech over medicine. Sound familiar? I smile. Send me her deck. This is my life now. This is my revenge. Not just against my parents, but against every system and every family that decides some children are worth less than others. I survived. I thrived. And they never recovered. The end.